This conference will now be recorded.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. This is Howie Ferguson, Executive Director of the Construction Owners Association of America. And I'm joined by...
Hi, this is Allison Muth. I'm a facilities project manager with Texas Children's Hospital. I'm actually located in Austin, Texas, helping to manage projects here. And then I'm also the current president of Construction Owners Association of America.
Yeah, so Allison and I were really jazzed about presenting this in person in San Antonio, but for reasons we're all painfully and well aware of, we're doing it virtually. So thank you for attending at whatever point in time you're seeing this, and bear with us because we're getting there quickly, but neither of us are virtual meeting experts, and so this feels awkward. Standing in front of 200 people would actually feel a lot more comfortable. So just bear with us on that. I'll tell you a little bit more about my background, and then Allison share more about hers. We'll tell you very briefly about COA and who we are, and then we'll get into the real meat of this, which is about this concept called the good owner. So the running joke in COA is I'm a recovering owner, a prior owner, U.S. Navy and the University of Florida for combined about 27 years. I was active for much of that time at UF with COA as a volunteer, and kind of liked it so much that I applied and got the job to now be the primary staff person. We're a very small staff of just 4.5 folks, but I'm proud to lead them, and we believe very deeply in the mission of this, which is all about helping owners manage projects better and just be better owners. So that's the quick summary of me and my background.
Sure. Thanks, Howie. And I'll tell a little bit more about my background. And I'm actually a recovering architect who's now gone to the owner's side. So I did practice architecture for about 8 years. And then after that, really started to want to know more about those that were potentially really the folks leading projects, and got engaged with the owner's side, and I've been with Texas Children's. That's really all my experience at the owner's side. And it's been great. I've been there almost 17 years now, and I've truly enjoyed it. So I think, again, it's great being an owner who's had experience in the design industry to sort of bridge all this together. And again, also my experience led me to COA, which again, I think the mission and everything that organization is focused on, we're happy to bring some of those concepts to you here today as we talk about being a good owner.
Oh yeah, and so real quick on Construction Owners Association, sorry about that. Here we go. We apologize for this. So just real quick, and Allison, you don't even need to go back. I can do this really quick. So COAA, Construction Owners Association of America, as the name implies, it confuses people outside of our business, but I think most folks within this industry understand what we mean by owners, although we're going to get into that a little bit. We've been around for just 25 years. We celebrated our 25th anniversary last year, which to those of us who've been involved with COA for a while, it seems like, oh, we've been around forever, but really compared to probably to CMAA, I know to AGC, AIA, some of the other organizations that have been around for literally 100 years, we're pretty new, new to the party. But again, as both Allison and I and the other folks that comprise our board and our other volunteer leaders, we believe very deeply in the concept of an organization that tries to help owners be better owners, and that actually directly relates to the subject matter we're covering today. And so you see on your screen there, it's a very brief agenda, and it's a short slide deck. We won't, do the death by PowerPoint thing. Hopefully you'll find this to be a pretty quick paced thing, but with an important point. We'll talk about what a good owner is, and we put good in quotes on purpose, and we'll talk about that. We'll then talk about why. Why does that even matter? If you understand and grasp and agree with the concept of a good owner, what does that have to do with anything, especially project success? And then we'll talk about how one that wants to be a quote good owner goes about trying to become a good owner. And then we'll close with something that very much relates to this good owner concept, and we call that the COA way. So that's our agenda for today.
Great, thanks, Howie. And And certainly, we want to make sure that you really leave here today with some new concepts and ideas, and most specifically, really understanding what we mean by being a good owner. You're going to hear us say that a lot, so we're going to keep saying that because it really does matter. And we're also going to make sure that we explain, to Howie's point, as you see in some of our agenda topics, why being a good owner truly will help improve how you deliver projects. We want to make sure that, again, we leave you with some tips of how you can start doing this. So even though you may feel that you're in this category of a good owner, we're going to try to show you today some of the things, and maybe in addition to some of the things you've already been doing, what else could you be doing to truly make sure you are practicing those ideas and principles to make sure you are truly a good owner. And then again, understanding these concepts about the COA way and how it all does directly tie together with being a good owner, with all of those principles, and certainly delivering projects in a better way. So let's start with making sure we're all on the same page about how we describe an owner. And so defining that's really important. We know there's lots of owner representatives, there's lots of folks that may think they truly do fall in that category, but let's make sure we understand and we define that for ourselves. And so as you see our analogy, the three-legged stool, which sometimes in our project industry is always referred to as scope, schedule, and budget. But for us, and how I've practiced for years, and even specifically what drew me to COA as an organization, the three-legged stool is really focused on the three parties who truly support delivering projects. And the owner is really in the center of that stool, of one of those legs. And so that three-legged stool for us is really focused on the three different parties: the designer, the builder, and the owner. And so who is that owner? That is someone that truly owns land, potentially space. They're managing and maintaining their facilities. They're using their capital within their own organization to reinvest in those facilities for whatever is needed to construct new areas, perhaps, and areas that were unbuilt before, renovate existing spaces into maybe new use, or also just expand maybe into other areas or regions. But that's the type of owner that we're really talking about. It's someone who truly, owns those facilities, has a vested interest in how they're utilized, how they're maintained, and certainly, again, making sure that the monies within their own organization are reinvested to prolong those facilities or change them for whatever purpose is needed. So what then would describe a good owner, and how would you define someone being a good owner? Well, I mean, I thought all of a sudden I made this great decision to leave architecture, and it was a tough one, no doubt, but going to the owner side, and I was thinking, I was bringing my mindset of having some good ideas about understanding the design industry, and just in general, I felt I'm a good person. So isn't that what makes me a good owner? Well, not quite. And this is just a reference, a reminder, those goody two-shoes, it's not just feeling like you're a good person and you bring good ideas. There's a lot more to it to really define owners as being good. And we want to talk about that.
Thanks, Allison. So yeah, Allison teed up fundamental stuff. What do we mean by owner, and what do we not mean by good owner? So now I'm going to talk about what we do mean by good owner. And truth in advertising, this is a slide, and we talked about taking this out, but we left it in because this was going to be the first, purposely early in the presentation, first point where we would begin interacting with our audience. Well, of course, we're recording to air. We don't have an audience, so we can't be very interactive unless we pretend and do it ourselves. So just, again, bear with us that we're showing you the original content. Allison, you can click the next bullet. Here's a couple of things that help begin to define, click once more too, Allison, what we mean by good owner. And again, there's the what else, that's where you all we're going to raise your hands, or raise your virtual hand if we were doing this live virtually, but we don't have that. That's okay though. So here's a couple of things, what examples of what we mean by good owner. We mean timely, and there's a lot of things where timeliness matters in this business. Obviously, there's three big ones, and you may even switch the order and say that timely payment goes a long way. You can get away with a lot of sins as an owner if you pay timely. That may be the most important, but the other two are huge too. Timely decisions, as many of you or all of you probably know, can wreck a project uh, in a heartbeat. And so can going back on decisions. You make them and then you change your mind and make them again. That's no good. And of course, timely communication. And there's many other things where timeliness comes into play, but those are three pretty big ones. And I think most builders and designers listening to this would be shaking their heads and doing the thumbs up on those. We also mean fairness when we talk about the concept of a good owner. And again, like timeliness, there's a lot of places or aspects where fairness comes into play. There's three. Fair with expectations. I think a lot of times we as owners overstep. We're overly optimistic that, well, we can do this project in 6 months of design and 10 months of construction, no problem. And that turns out to be wildly underestimated for one or both of those. Maybe that's because of pressure from above. Maybe that's because of a real deadline, but we have to be fair with our expectations. Same thing with contracts. Most of the owners that are COA members don't use off-the-shelf AIA, consensus docs, any of those other fine products. A lot of our owners are serial builders. They do so many projects, they have their own set of documents. Okay, so look in the mirror and wonder, are your contracts, I'm talking about your owner AE, owner CM, owner DB, your IPD, whatever delivery method, are they fair? Are they truly balanced? That's part of being a good owner. And then certainly negotiations, whether you're talking about an upfront contract negotiation of a change order, negotiation of a schedule extension, excuse me, those are all places, and of course there are others, but those are three really good examples of where fairness comes into play. And as we define the good owner, being timely and fair would be two really good examples. This again is where we would pause and say, okay, you guys, what else? We can't do that, so we'll just go ahead and, Allison, you can go ahead and go to the next slide and talk about some other things that help define what we mean by good owner. Communicative, and you all could probably understand each of these, but just to help kind of round it out and give you some examples, you can just say, be a good communicator and move on, but let's be a little more specific. Let's start in the beginning. Are you as an owner being fully communicative to the extent you can when it comes to scope, the scope of the project? If you're advertising for an AE team, for a design team, or a CM, or a design builder, or whatever, are you being as transparent as you can, even to the extent of helping them understand what you don't know? Like, that's half of it, right? Is saying, look, we think we want to build XYZ on this site for this purpose, but we've never done one of these before, and so here are the things we don't know. Even that level of communication is super helpful and tells your partners, hey, this is an owner that's not afraid of being transparent and explaining what they know and don't know. That's what we mean by communicative. And that goes to a lot of other things, goals and risks and processes. When I worked at University of Florida, we had a pretty extensive, some good, some not so good, but extensive, always extensive, just processes and forms and ways we did things. And I took it upon myself to say, look, I have to be kind of the docent, the tour guide to help folks like the firm Allison used to work with, or any CM or whoever, kind of navigate their way through this. I have to help explain how we work, how the inner workings, the bad and the good, and the pitfalls and the landmines. That's what we mean by being communicative. Knowledgeable, certainly that's almost like a prerequisite, right? It helps to be, if you're going to be a good owner, at least generally knowledgeable about the industry, certainly about your own internal stuff, like those contracts, your procedures, those inner workings, certainly costs, at least having a general idea for the types of projects you do, ballpark range, maybe it's a reference guide or standards or whatever. That sort of knowledge, that's part of being a good owner. Engaged and aware, that that can make up for a lack of knowledge in a heartbeat. If you're just participatory, as opposed to aloof or sort of like so high above the fray that you're not really involved and kind of rolling your sleeves up with your teammates. Um, I think I can. I've never been an actual practicing. I have a PE, but I was never a practicing architect or engineer or CM. But I've worked with enough of them to know that they really appreciate owners who are just there. Like being there is half the battle, and by there we mean engaged, aware, eyes open, radar on, fully aware of what's going on. Organization for sure. There's a lot of balls in the air in these projects, even the small ones. So just simply not being confused or disheveled or just kind of winging it, that's no way to be a good owner. The leadership piece is, again, kind of obvious, but we at COA like to distinguish leadership from management, where, and you could argue over the definition, but leadership sometimes requires courage. Not battlefield life and death courage, but the courage to deliver bad news, the courage to make the right decision, which may not be the most expedient decision. That kind of leadership, that's what we mean when we say good owner. And then the last piece may not be something most people think of, but there's a level of humility that comes with being, or at least trying to be, a good owner, because you can get a little bit enraptured with the power, right? You're the one making decisions. You've got the money. You can hold up payment, and that has gone and does go to some people's heads a little bit. But keep this in mind, like the old way, super old school saying about he with the gold makes the rules. Okay, that's probably still true, but that sort of arrogance probably won't get you to the sort of project that you're hoping to get. Some level of humility. That doesn't mean just taking whatever the team and the partners give you, but a little bit of level of humility, always willing to learn, that kind of a thing. That's what we mean by good owner. Allison, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think I'm going to go into my next set because it really does support this, but it's important. I know they look like words we use all the time, but really understanding what these things mean and really the expectation of that owner's organization to really bring these to the table is important. So, as we talk about why would we even bother with some of these things that Howie presented, and is it really matters? Is it really that important? Well, and how does it relate? Well, it does quite a bit because, if you have an owner that's really bringing sincerely some of those elements and principles that Howie just talked about, it can really change the type of talent that you're bringing to the table. And that talent could be your own internal talent to the organization. As you're trying to go out and attract folks to manage your work, whether it's small renovation projects, new, greenfield projects, wouldn't you want to be attracting that best talent from the industry to help you manage those projects? Wouldn't you also want to be attracting the best talent to even help you design and build those? So not just supporting, your success internally with your own staff, but making sure that those that, you ultimately are seeking to help you build these projects, design these projects, you want the best talent coming to you. And a lot of owners do this, and I know there's lots of reasons why in regulatory, you have to use a certain way of advertising and soliciting for talent to come and help you in projects. I get that, but there are ways, even in such defined, regulatory kind of rules, to make sure that you can embed some of those elements of making sure that you are really attracting that right type of talent. I want folks who want to come work for me. I don't want to just put things out there and hope I get the A team, right, responding to my project request. So many of those things that Howie's just talked about are huge just to attract who do you want working on your projects. This falls right in line with culture and reputation. And at Texas Children's, we work truly in a partnership mindset. We try to minimize how much we truly, and are lucky, we don't have to go out for bid for every project. So again, having folks coming to us and saying they want to work on our projects, even if we don't have projects. That's fantastic. And why are they doing that? And I've asked them many times, because I've often wondered over the years that I've been there and been integrated and so much a part of the project management team. I said, well, why? Why do you want to come work for us? What's going on? Like, to me, this is how we do it. And I've been fortunate to work in a place that really embraces many of these concepts. But so many of them, and it's not just, again, the specific words about culture and reputation aren't exactly those words, but what they tell me is that, they want to work for Texas Children's because they know that, again, we're fair. We have a listening ear. We are an engaged owner. And again, all of that does fold into the type of culture that we're creating and how we manage projects. That's why folks want to come work for a good owner. And that's what we want to make sure, that you need to understand those elements of being a good owner so you can continue to have improved project success. We also know that if you have those open lines of communication, this idea, right, of being on track and with schedule and budget, that's always a lot sometimes about what we focus on of defining project success. Is we were on track, we were on targets with both budget and schedule, so it was a great project. Well, it probably was quite the journey to get there. Every project I start, we always have an end date in mind. That date may change along the way, but how we communicate that so we can still all feel confident that we were always on track. We were within, those parameters of the schedules that we set. We were also within those parameters of the schedule that we might have changed along the way. And there was an open dialogue about budget. And so we can say that, again, being a good owner and being communicative about your expectations related to this, being transparent about what your budget targets are, definitely you're going to have so much more success on your projects by making sure that happens. And then, of course, having all those elements pulled together, the end product, it will be better. We know it's going to be better. And experience, and I know there's been a lot of, a lot of folks don't like to reference it, but soft skills, and there's been a lot of focus about making sure that, we are incorporating and including that personal side of what we do as part of our process. And there is truth to that. It's not that anyone is saying how to do this. I think it's different on every project. But at the end of the day, you do want folks, whether it's your own internal team or the consultant, that you've hired to help deliver the project, you would want to reflect, I would think, truly with that good owner's mindset. You want to reflect and make sure that everyone had the best experience. And best experience doesn't mean it was, always happy. It might not have always been, just gleeful, let's just say. You might have had some really tough days, but the journey was with the entire team together. They experienced it together. And so at the end of the day, there is a reflection that can be had, like I said, by your internal staff, by those you're working with, that really feel like they had that best experience, because that embodies the fact that they were engaged all along the way. There was transparency, there was communication. That's really what defines the idea of having that best experience. So it truly does matter. And it's one of the reasons why we're so passionate about this message, because being a good owner will help, again, with those projects, and will help the entire team become better at what they're trying to do.
Hey, and Allison, just to add to that real quick, you don't even have to go back, but on that best experience, it's to your point about, it's not always gleeful, it's not always happy. It's not so much about joy and happiness, it's about being rewarding. I think that's what brings people back to make them want to work with you again, is do they feel like it was meaningful, fulfilling, rewarding, and maybe a little bit fun sometimes too. I mean, that was just kind of my nature to try to interject humor to cut tension. But if people feel like it's meaningful and rewarding, they'll probably want to work for you again. And we think that's part of being a good owner.
Exactly. No, those are great. And those are some other great things to remember, because of, stopping and taking time to reward. And again, sometimes those rewards are just on the fact that reward because we made a mistake, we worked through it, we responded well as a team. those rewards and acknowledgments are just as good as when you have pure successes, right? And things that work out exactly like you'd hoped. So that's a good point, Howie. Thanks for reminding me about that. So, these are all great things that we're talking about. As we know, there's always some constraints, right? There's always those constraints out there that are probably working against the best owner that we could even ever find, right? There's just things embedded within organizations with how processes or whatever might be defined. And so, again, this is another point where we really like to hear from those that are participating in these sessions to give us some of their thoughts, because I'm always interested to hear, well, what are your constraints? And are we hearing something new, maybe kind of sneaking into the industry that we haven't heard about before? So I would ask everyone to think about that before I kind of show my next answers here. But what are those constraints that you might all be dealing with? What are the things that, you really feel like you could make that big jump, big leap into really kind of redirecting your projects into a better state of delivery? Yet there's just things you just can't get past. We all have them. We know we do. So here's a few of them that we hear on and on. And I'm sure for many of you, you're like, oh yes, definitely. And I'm sure for everyone, which there's probably a difference that could be at what's at the top of the list. But funding is always one of those constraints of just, there are defined processes, I'm sure, within every owner organization of how you could even solicit for funding for a project. And in many times, at Texas Children's, like the facilities planning department, we help manage the projects, but we have to actually rely on others to go and request funding, and then again, follow the procedures to make that happen. So, but being aware of that is really important. Politics, who doesn't have politics, right? There's, no matter what, and as much as I would love if our industry would get rid of all titles and everything else, it's just not realistic. There's a hierarchy within your own organization. There's a hierarchy with probably others you work with. Understanding that's important, but that's definitely one that we hear a lot about. You can't work around it, or maybe you can. It's something you got to think about. How many people do you actually have to report to when you're working on a project? Think about that. So many chefs in the kitchen, so many folks. Who's even giving the direction, and who's the key decision maker? Some projects, right? It's like, oh, you're so excited as a project manager, you're handed this great new project. And then the next, your first question is, well, who's my decision maker? Who do I go to? Oh, but it's a list of 12. Okay, how's that going to work? So challenges with, again, who's really giving the direction on that project? Is it truly just one person? That's optimal. I always ask every time, is there just one person? Usually there's not. I haven't had a project yet where there's only one chef in the kitchen. There's always multiple chefs in the kitchen. So that's something that you've got to think in mind, that truly can just so quickly derail, right? This mindset of trying to stay focused on being a good owner. So many other things, like you said, procurement, contracts. I mean, those are just things that you have a process, you have to follow it. Sometimes even the selection process, same thing, just like some of the funding, it's defined in your organization. You don't have, it may not seem you have an ability to change that because this is how we've always done it. This is how we need to do it. A couple of other things, programming, sometimes that can be a constraint because sometimes, again, depending on who you work for, you're just handed a program. Make this work. Don't understand where it came from. Not even sure it even fits. Not sure how we even got there, defining it that way, but here you go. Make this happen. So sometimes, many of those programs, especially if they're handed down that way, it's probably 10 pounds of a program and you have 5 pounds of a facility to use to solve it. So day one, you're already starting off with some constraints. And then same idea. Sometimes projects have the ability for some pre-designing and planning efforts, but many times they don't. Or if they were, it might have been done by someone else, just like the program. So not really understanding where things came from can be a challenge. And other constraints we hear about are, again, just flat out communication, which is honestly embedded in so many of these elements, because as so many of these things might just be defined and given to you, they were communicated that way. So right off the bat, as someone trying to manage a project, you're being communicated to even less, not really sure where this comes from, what's supporting it. And then you have to take that and try to message it to your team. That's a constraint right off the bat that we're trying to overcome.
Yeah,
Howie,
thanks,
you can
Allison.
help us
So,
maybe. How do we get over those? Yeah. How do we
right,
overcome some of
yeah.
these?
So we're kind of coming down the home stretch on this whole uh, good owner concept. We started with what, talked a little about why. Why does it matter? And now we're deep into the how. And this is just one approach, right? There's probably other ways, but a way to look at this is to a little three-pronged attack where you take those constraints, and as Allison said, the constraints for each owner are not only going to vary, but they could even vary from project to project. In fact, they probably do. Like some of your constraints to being a good owner. Politics, I can tell you at my former employer at UF and probably most higher ed institutions, that was a constant. There was pretty much always politics involved. Some projects there were funding constraints, and some projects there weren't. So it depends on the owner for sure, but it also depends on the project. So let's just consider that we're looking at an upcoming project, a single project. So a first way to do this, or a way to do this, is to sort of take those constraints and itemize them, list them, and then sort of think of them in two different categories, changeable and unchangeable. And the thought that comes to my mind, if I had a visual on the slide, it would be for this number two, it would be the serenity prayer, which even if you're not a religious person, most people have at least heard of this, right? This is the thing that talks about, uh, Lord, please help me to have the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, and the courage to change the things I can change, and the wisdom to understand the difference. That's kind of what we're talking about here. There are simply constraints to being a good owner that you as a PM or even your boss's boss cannot change. They just are what they are. So what we're talking about here is kind of sorting constraints by project or by owner into these two different categories. And then the third one is, okay, you've got them sorted, go to work on the ones that are changeable. So to give you an example, or to refine it, kind of dive a little deeper, Allison, if you go to the next slide, here are most of those constraints that Allison just talked about, maybe even a couple of extras. And we took a shot. And again, you could argue this, that for your instance, you as an owner, or even project to project, you could argue that some are, oh no, this one's not changeable. This one really is changeable. Okay, that's fine. Everyone's situation is different, but you get the general idea here, right? If funding for a particular project or a particular owner is, well, we can't change that. We can't print more money. We can't go back to the funding source and ask for more money. Then that's really not changeable. Fine, then put it in that column. Politics, I just mentioned that one, at least at my former institution, that was kind of a constant, and that's way above my pay grade. I'm not going to fix that. We were a very inclusive owner, and eventually it always paid dividends, right? Having more chefs in the kitchen, more hands on deck, was painful sometimes. Collaboration is messy, as our mutual friend Jack Muma says, but ultimately it pays dividends. And so the bad side of all the chefs in the kitchen, we weren't going to change that either. There's question marks by the last two because those could or could not be changeable. Again, it depends on your situation. Some owners have the ability, for example, to they invented or wrote or created their selection processes and maybe their contracts. We did at UF for both of those. Other owners are not so lucky. Those selection processes are dictated to them by higher authority or government or whatever, and or their contracts are sort of what they are. You don't have the power as the owner to change those. Okay, so those could be in either column, but again, you get the point. For each owner and each project, it could vary. Same thing over on the right side, the green font, where at least for this simple example, we kind of thought, well, procurement and contracts, kind of like selection process, there you go. They're kind of showing up, could be in one column, could be in the other. But the last four are probably things most owners could improve and change on the road to being a better owner. You probably can, to some extent, improve your due diligence before you hire a design team. And that's what we mean by programming or pre-design planning. Have you really explored every alternative? Have you gathered all the information you can about the particular project that you are conceiving? That may include things like, actual tests and surveys, and maybe you're renovating a building and you did hazmat surveys to quantify asbestos and lead paint and other things like that. Maybe it's a topo survey, geotech, or maybe it's not, maybe you haven't done quite that much. It's way more speculative. Okay, then outline that. That's kind of what we're saying, is to be a better owner, are you really going as deep and granular as you can on this pre-design stage? If not, take a look at that. Maybe that's something you can improve. Most owners can be better communicators. And again, we don't just mean like fancy words and giving speeches. We just mean like, be a little more transparent, be a little more regular and frequent and consistent. Make sure your staff all sort of generally is on the same page with how they communicate, right? So you don't have the one person who everything is a phone call, another person who everything is an email, or Western Union, smoke signals, whatever. Like, there probably ought to be some kind of a game plan that kind of says, look, folks, if it's this kind of an issue, well, let's pick up the phone and call someone on that. That's a little more sensitive as opposed to shooting an email with 30 people copied, that sort of thing. That's something most owners can improve on. Templates and models, that's a big one. We had that in spades. That was not our problem at UF. We may have had too many, but standardizing how you work is kind of the point here. That helps your own internal staff, your project managers, and it helps those who are coming to work for you to know, okay, this is kind of a pain doing this the way they want to do change orders, but at least I know that that's how they do it here, and it's going to be consistent. And if I do another project, they're going to use the same template. They're not making it up as they go, that kind of thing. And then the last one, what we mean by workarounds, is that think about those things over on the left, or whatever your things are on the left, whatever your unchangeable constraints are. We don't mean breaking laws. We don't mean, slipping one in, but there are sometimes ways to work around constraints or walls that cannot be moved. And you figure it out, whether you quantify it and could list it in a PowerPoint or not, you probably are already doing that. If you have, you have funding and politics stuff, and well, you're figuring out a way to get stuff done anyway. That's kind of what we mean. Don't give up on the apparently unchangeable constraints. You may not be able to change them, but you probably can do things to sort of work around them without getting in trouble or breaking rules. So hopefully that approach helps a little bit. If you're interested in becoming a good owner, that's one way. There are others, but that's one way to maybe look at it. Just kind of think about those constraints, itemize them, sort them by changeable and unchangeable, and then go to work on the ones that are changeable. That's kind of what we mean. So to segue to the very last piece of this, I'll tee it up and Allison will smack it over the fence, to use a baseball analogy. COA, really since before Allison and I were even involved, has always had something about it that was a little different, a little bit tangible, a little bit intangible. Couldn't really put a finger on it, didn't have a name, but it was kind of there, having to do with mindset, culture, approach to projects, and it's part of this good owner thing, is actually part of that. Well, a couple of years ago, a small group of COA volunteers went about, hey, let's really quantify this. There's something to our events, to how we work, to our owner training institute, to all of our offerings. Let's see if we can actually tag it with something. So they did, and they came up with this term that actually is, I believe it's a registered trademark now, called the COA way. And we wanted to end this good owner presentation with a very, very brief, shallow dive into that, because it relates to the good owner concept. And what the bullets say there on the left begin to define what we mean. A desire to continuously improve, a belief that true collaboration, which, as I said earlier, can be messy, can be hard, but it ultimately normally leads to more project success, however you define success. And then a mindset that actually values people and relationships. This is probably, I don't know that anything is most important, but this one is tied for first with several other things, because in this age in 2020 where we have all the tools at our disposal, everything from uh, tools, actual tools like in the field, digital, laser scanning and robots and all that stuff, technology tools, file sharing platforms, PMIS, all this stuff, and then other tools in the industry jar like Lean Construction Institute, which is a fabulous organization. Think about all the tools that you learn about and employ in the lean aspect. That's all fabulous, but ultimately it's people that deliver projects. People on the owner side, people on the design side, people on the contractor side, and then all of the players in between, vendors and other stakeholders and code officials, and it's people that make these pro. So the co-way also speaks to valuing, treasuring really that the fact that people and relationships between those people that they really matter. Um, so with that, I think Allison's going to continue on and talk even a little bit more about the co-away, and we'll wrap this up.
Certainly. So, one of the questions Howie and I get a lot, right, is, and at COA, but, really with everyone wanting to understand this idea about being a good owner. And that's why ending this with the co-away is really important because, right, everybody wants, where's the formula? Find me that manual, right? When you hire new staff, they're like, well, tell me how to do this. Well, there's not a specific formula or even set of rules that you can just say, we've done it this way, it's worked for 100 years, here you go. And, I always remind everybody that, and even what excites me so much about this industry, every project that you bring a group of people together, that'll be the first time they've ever managed that type of project. In our industry, every project that is delivered is unique. It's unique because of what it is, right? I don't think that we typically design a lot of things that are exactly the same. And even for owners that may be in that business of generating the same type of, let's say, restaurant or facility, the site they deal with is different. Most of them aren't able to find, right, the exact same layout of land. So every project we do, even as a serial builder, if you're an owner that's constantly doing lots of work, it's unique. It's very unique. So how do you create a formula that is going to apply to every project that is unique? You can't. And I really don't think you can. And so the way we define and really support this idea to make sure that, again, you're bringing that mindset, you're bringing the good owner concepts together, it is all about this idea of embracing the co-away. And first of all, it's the co-away that makes sure that all three parties are represented. So as much as we've really shouted out and focused on our owners today, none of this works without our consultants and our builders, just as we said at the beginning, the three-legged stool. All of those parties must be at the table. So you have to have a team of people around you to help deliver these projects. But what's important, as we have talked about today, again, shouting out to our owners, it has to be led by a good owner. So again, going back to those leadership skills that Howie highlighted, that it's not managing the process. It's not hiring a lot of folks to help manage these processes. It's making sure within the owner, you've embedded great leadership teams to lead these projects because you're putting all these people together. You've got to have an owner that's really at the helm leading this work. There's also a commitment to share the best practices. It goes back to the whole idea. Every project, we make mistakes, we learn, we share those lessons we've learned to the next team doing another project. But again, even if the project's similar, it's going to be unique. So we're constantly, again, in this industry, learning from each other. But what's important is you've got to make sure we share that with each other to ensure continuous improvement within the entire project team. And culture, that is just, again, as Howie said before, it's certainly at the top of our list throughout a lot of the conversations. That culture has to be built on trust and respect. And if you have all these things, if you create that transparency within your teams, you communicate well, you're talking about best practices, lessons learned, even mistakes, successes, all of that. You've got an owner leading those conversations and you're bringing together the right group of people. You will complete better projects. We know that they're going to be more successful. because again, at the end of the project, that experience everyone can look back on. You're going to end that project and know that there were lots of great experiences shared, lots of folks that grew, and you know that again, all along the way, you had an owner assisting with leading those efforts. So again, the good owners, we allow for mistakes. That authenticity of collaboration, we've said it several times. It's just, it happens. It will happen. And good owners, it's nice because over time that just comes naturally. At first, if you haven't been in that situation, to really be able to have that authentic collaboration, it can be tough at first. You know, how do you do this? And is it okay to share so much and be this transparent and, you know, really share everything across the table? It is work, but it's certainly worth it. Promoting that communication, that accountability and trust, I mean, that's just huge. You know that, again, those with the right mindset and are thinking that way on the owner side, they expect that. And if you expect that from an owner, from your team, and then you translate that as expectation, you know, to the entire team that you're bringing on board to help you, it's just amazing what you can see happen. And then again, going back to making sure that that idea of recognizing, rewarding, really celebrating when teams, like I say, are successful. And successes can come from mistakes or just true successes, but making sure that those are recognized all along the way. Again, supporting that experience at the end of a project that you want everyone to look back on and say, yep, you know what, that was a great experience. And you know what, even more, I want to know when I can work on your next project. So when that type of reputation gets out there, then it's very clear you've embraced these ideas of being a good owner. You've got the industry noticing how you're doing things, and you have a lot of folks who want to come and help support the way you're delivering projects. That's what it means to be a good owner. And that's what we feel, as we've kind of coined it, that's what truly reflects the COA way, embodying all of those things to make sure that we deliver projects better. So Howie, do you have any parting words? That was truly a lot of what we wanted to bring today and share with all of you. We've got our information up here on the slides. As Howie said, if we were in a room, this is when we really love to open it up and hear feedback from those participating, to share your stories and experiences. And sometimes we hear more of, man, I've got an owner you need to talk to. That's great. And sometimes it does take our industry partners to help owners recognize that, you know, maybe there's some things we could all do differently. But having those conversations with the owners, you know, that's where it needs to start. So I've really enjoyed sharing all of this content with you today. Hope you've taken some of these items away with you. We've got our information there up, listed for anyone to reach out to us. Feel free. Like I said, our emails are there. So Howie, any other words?
Yeah, just a couple, Allison, with one primary thought, because I think we've covered this stuff really well. As Allison said, feel free to reach out to either or both of us. But I also want to pause to say thank you to CMAA, because what they've done in inviting COA and several other organizations to present at their conference. Again, it was supposed to be in person, but we all know why it can't be this year. But huge kudos to them. It's a very COA way. Now that you all understand what that means, it's a very COA way thing and very humble thing to invite sister organizations to present at your event. And CMAA is like COA in that it has 2 national events each year. I just applaud them. It's very leadership kind of a thing to do, and I hope we can reciprocate down the road. So thank you to CMAA sincerely on behalf of the whole organization. The only other thing is a bit of housekeeping. On the next slide, Allison, if you go to that last slide, there's a standard blurb. I won't even begin to try to read all of that, but it basically has to do with CEUs, which we know how valuable those are to many folks. And so there's all the information you need, but here's the real takeaway. If you're interested, I'm fairly certain CMAA is probably like COA in that you'll get a certificate of completion for attending this virtual conference, which will then allow you to pursue your CEUs. But if you have questions, contact CMAA staff, and I'm sure they can help you out. So again, on behalf of Allison and all of COA, thank you for putting up with
Thank
us
you.
in this virtual environment, and thanks again to CMAA.
This conference will now be recorded.